Okay, so in this video, I'm going to cover creating user-defined functions in Google Sheets that return dynamic arrays. So something similar to unique or sort functions when you have a single function that returns a bunch of things. And the objective in this particular case is going to be we have this list of names, and we would like to go here and do equals split names. Open parentheses, highlight this range, close parentheses, and hit enter. And we want this to separate everything to first, middle, and last name columns. And right now that doesn't work because this function doesn't exist. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go under Tools, Script Editor. Here we are. I'm going to name this project. And here we're going to create that function split names. Now that function is going to accept that argument, which is going to be, see in this case, when I do this range of values. And I'll just call it people. It's just a variable name. You can call it whatever you want. Now that variable here is going to be this range of values right here. And that will basically be an array in here. So because it's an array, we should be able to do people dot. And on this array, we're going to have all the array methods. As you can see, autocomplete doesn't figure that out, but it's an array. So we can use map method on this. Now, I'm not going to be explaining arrays in this video because there's a lot to explain about arrays and array methods. I am going to link to a playlist in the description that goes over arrays, array methods, all of this stuff. So going forward here, I'm going to do this people map, and we're going to map this to a new array. And in this one, we're going to take each person, and for each one of those, we're going to do a callback function. Now, this is the new way of writing this callback functions in JavaScript. If you watch some of my previous videos, you may see me doing something like this instead. It's really the same thing. You can do this way or the other way. It's going to work. So at this point, what's going to happen, this person is going to be one of these people right here, one of these names. So now we can take that name and work with it. So I'm going to leave this function alone for a second and go to a different function here to explain you a couple of things. Let's just create a function here. So in JavaScript, if you, for example, have a text variable, on your text variable, you can actually run this method split. And that allows you basically to split your text using a delimiter. So for example, if we use a delimiter as a space like this, that should allow us to split this John Doe using this space in the middle. Let's just save this in a variable here. And let me try to just console log this. So I'm going to run this function explain so you can see what happens here. Here's my results. So as you can see, I got this log. And what it returns, it basically returns an array after the split that has John and it has Doe, basically the first and last name. And that's with the separation of a space. Now, if we go here and add something else in the middle and have another space in here, if I go ahead and run this function again, you'll see we get 3 pieces in our array separated with those spaces. So basically, we take a separator of some sort and we split the string into an array of different parts. Now, this separator can be anything you want. So you can do a period, for example, as a separator. And now see, I got this part before the dot, like this much, and then this part after the dot separated into the second part. Now in this case, I'm going to be using a space to do that separation. So in case we have even more things here, if I run this, see, it's going to keep splitting all of those things like this. So now we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts. So now let's say I wanted to get this first part, the second part, and the rest of these. So what I could do here, if I wanted to get the first part, I would just do 0, which is this John. I can do 1 to get to the second part. You get the idea. And then 2 would get this, and so on, right? But how could I get the rest of these in one piece? So in order for me to do that, I'm going to create another variable here. And I'm going to do a trick here. I'm going to create actually multiple variables here. I'm going to do A, B, and C. 3 variables. And I'm going to put those in a square bracket like this. And then I'm going to take that res, which is going to be this array after we split those things. And basically, we're going to take that variable and push the results into these 3 variables here on the left. Now, the problem is there is more than 3 here. So we need to say that one of them should be getting more than one result. So this is what we call unpacking, I believe, at least in Python, I think that's what they call it, but it's kind of the same thing. So in order for you to do that, what you do here after the C, instead of just doing C, I'm just going to do this dots here, 3 dots. Let's just run this. And then let's try to see what's inside of that C variable. So I'm going to do this and run this again, this function. And if you look here, what I got as a result is this right here. And if I check under A, that should give me John. B is going to give me S. And C is basically the remaining stuff. These 3 things. Now, because these 3 is an array, I should be able to do dot join on that array and provide the separator as a space again. So if I rerun this, you'll see that I got this instead of an array. It's basically a combined string of all of this remaining parts. So what I want to check is what happens if we actually don't have too many things. We just have one thing remaining like this. So at that point, this is probably not going to be an array. But let's check and see, is that an array or is it not? So I'm going to take this join out, save this, and rerun it. So apparently it still gives me this as an array here. So we should be able to still do dot join, and because it's just one piece of thing, it's just going to return that. So that's a few things we're going to need to be able to build our function. So I'm really not going to be using this stuff here. I was just trying to explain you this so that I can use it here so it's not like a mystery what I'm doing. Let's get into our function. So now we get to this mapping and we get this person, which is going to be one of these things right here. So this is going to be text. And if I want to split that text, again, I can use that split method and split it by space. So we'll take that person and do dot split. And we're going to split it by space. Exactly the same way I did it before here. And we'll save it in a variable. So I'll use let instead of var. Since we're in V8 engine, you could use vars too. It wouldn't be any different in this case, but I'm just going to call this name parts. So now this name parts at this point should be pretty much this res that we had before. So now we're going to check how many things we actually have in this particular array. So if we have like 3 things like this, then we know we have like first name, middle initial, last name, or middle name, whatever. If we have 2 things, then we know we have first and last name. If we have 1, it's just going to be, I guess we're just going to call it first name. And in case there is more like this, we'll just basically call this a part of the last name. So how do we do that? So what we're going to do, we're going to take this name part, which is also going to be an array, if you remember this. And because it's an array, it's going to have .length property, which should basically tell us how many things we have in this array. So now we can check and we can say if that has more than or equal to 3 parts. So basically, if it's greater than or equal to 3, then at this point we know we got first, middle, and last, and possibly more on the right. So that's one here. So let's just comment this. I'm going to say close if 3. And then I'm going to do another if statement below this. And I'm going to check if the length equals to 2. And if it's 2, we'll just say it's first and last name. And then we may have a case when it's just 1. Then we'll say it's just first name. Okay. So now that we have this, let's see what we're going to do in each one of these cases. So in case we have greater or equal to 3, what we would have to do is we're going to take that name part and we're going to unpack it inside of a list of arguments, similar to what I was doing in this line 25 right here. So let's just get back to the top. So we're going to take a new variable here, and I'm going to give this some names. And for this last name, just in case, we're going to do this 3 periods to do the unpacking. And we're going to make it equal to our name part, which is that array we have after the split. So now we're going to have fn for first name. That should hold the first name. mn should hold the middle name, and that ln should be an array that would be whatever the last part is. So at that point, because we're doing mapping of this array, we can return those results back. So what I can do, I can simply just return an array. And in this array, the first column is going to be the first name. The second column is going to be middle name. And the third column is going to be that last name with a join as a space in the middle. And that was that same join I was demonstrating below. If we have more than one thing happening as a last name, we'll just join it together and basically have it in one piece. And that should be our return for our map if we have 3 things after the split. So now let's get to the next case. So in case we have first and last name, right? So in that case, we're going to basically return 3 things again, but it's just going to be middle part empty. So we'll return again an array. So the first column is going to be the first name. And the way we're going to get to it, we already have this name part. That's going to be an array. And the first element in that array is going to be the first name. So if I just do name part 0, that should give me the first name. And then the second, which is going to be the middle name, it's just going to be empty. So we'll just do an empty string. And for the third one, we'll just do name parts 1, which is going to be basically the last name in that case, because we're going to have 2 things, 0 and 1. So that's the return for this. And again, we don't really have to worry about this other ones, because if you return something from the function, like if we have returned this, it's not going to keep running the rest of this if statements. It's just going to return the first return, basically. And finally, we have the case when we just have a single thing. So if we just have a single thing, then it's going to be very similar. We're just going to return that name parts 0, which is the first one. And the other 2 are going to be empty. So we'll do empty this and empty this. Now we have to make sure we return the same size, because in the end of the day, we need to get this grid of 3 columns. So if there's nothing to return back, we still have to do something like an empty position holder so we can return it. Now, all of this, let me just comment this. This ends map. This parentheses here is ending. Let me just zoom out here so we can see this in one piece. Hopefully it's not too small on your screen, but all of that is ending this map statement that we're gonna basically just run all of this. And as an end result, we're gonna get a new array back, which is really the array that needs to be returned. So we could just return this entire thing without saving that in a new array. Almost done here. There are a couple of things here. Because we're inside of this map, which is basically a loop starting from here in this bracket. See where we have this person and it ends all the way down here below. This stuff in the middle is going to run over and over and over, which means when we have these variables that we declare, we can't redeclare the same variable multiple times. So what we need to do, we need to try to get all these declarations outside of this loop. So I'm going to get on top here. So I'm going to do let name parts. That's one of the variables here. So once we declare it here, we can then remove the let from here and then use the variable name parts. And the other one that I declare here is really not one, but it's like 3 of them. So we'll just declare all of them right here. So I'll just comma separate all of those variables. So comma fn, comma mn, comma ln. So those would be these 3 variables here. So I'm going to make sure I declare them here. And once I do, then I don't need this let anymore. And I don't think I have any other lets here inside of this loop. Yep, it looks solid. So let's save this. Now I'm going to try to go back and run this function and see what we get. So I'm going to open our spreadsheet. And we're going to open this and run this. Error. It says person split is not a function. Okay, let's go check what I did wrong. So what I did wrong here is that this person is an array with a single column in it. But here I didn't really point to that being an array. I just directly went and I did split on top of that. So to get to that first thing in that array, first column, we would have to do person 0 in here. And I don't think we use person anywhere else here. So let's just save this and try this again to see what happens. That looks pretty good. See, I got all of this separated. Now, if I just go a little lower, let's go to line like 14 or so. See, we got those names separated right here with our own function. Now, what I also want to test is what's going to happen if one of these names is missing. So when we have a missing name, as you can see, we basically just get an empty result. That's excellent. So just to be safe, I am going to cast our name to a string right here. So I'll do toString. So just in case it's not a string, it's a number or something, let's just make sure we make it a string. And then we'll split it, so less chance of getting an error. Still works, as you can see. So the only issue left with this is possibly when we just use a single cell instead of using a range. So this usually, when we point to a range, gives an array. However, if we do a single cell like this, it's not going to give an array to our spreadsheet. And see, it says people.map is not a function because it's not an array anymore. It's just a single string. It basically just gives us an error. There is no people array to map through. So that's something to handle for us. So for that, right here on top, let's start by checking if that people variable is an array. So we should be able to do that by taking this array global, and it should have isArray method on it. And if we just pass that people to it, If that's an array, that thing should return true. And if it's not an array, which we can check like this, so we can say if it's not an array, so what would I want to do if it's not an array? Well, I could go through this whole logic all over again, or we could take all of this and move it to its own function, which might not be a bad idea, but I kind of want to keep this in a single function, and also I'm too lazy, I guess, to do that. What I'm thinking I could do when it's not an array, I will make it an array. So if it's just a string, then in that case, let's just make that people an array of arrays, which is usually how it would be if it was an array, and pass that in here. And now it will be an array with a single thing inside of that array. And then we should be able to map through that. And in case it's already an array here, it's just not going to get inside of this if statement. So let's just check if that actually works, because I'm a little worried about the return part of this. So I'm going to save this, go back and check this. Hey, that worked. And it splits just fine. So now let's make sure it also works if we just pull this down. I'm just going to go all the way. And it seems like we're in a good shape. So that's an example of a function here that returns a dynamic array back. So basically the whole idea here is you need to make sure that whatever function you create returns an array back. It doesn't matter how you create that array, you just need to make sure it's an array. Now in this case, I'm creating that array by doing map over this other array, and that returns a whole new array. And Google Sheets then is going to realize this new array has like 3 columns that I get and X number of rows, and it's just going to return those results back, just like this. And that should be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.